Chapter 1. A chill in the morgue. Averheim stank of wet stone, horse piss, and old blood. The city liked to pretend otherwise. Its banners still snapped proudly above the processional way, yellow and black catching the weak morning light. Merchants still hawked silk from the south and iron from the mountains. Soldiers still drilled in the courtyards, boots ringing against cobbles worn smooth by centuries of marching feet. But rot crept beneath the finery, seeping up through cracks no one wanted to look at too closely. Lisbeth Kramer knew that rot well. She worked where it always ended up. The city morgue squatted against the inner wall like a forgotten parasite, a low, heavy building of soot-darkened stone and narrow slit windows. No banners flew there, no prayers were spoken aloud. The dead were brought in through a side gate, wrapped in stained sheets or shoved onto carts like broken furniture. Once inside, they belonged to silence, to iron hooks, and to Lisbeth's knife. She stood alone at the central slab, sleeves rolled to the elbow, apron already soaked through with brown-red stains that would never quite wash out. The corpse before her was a dockhand, broad shoulders, split knuckles, a face slackened into an expression of dull surprise. Drowned, most likely. The river took men every week, especially when the fog rolled in thick enough to swallow lantern light. Lisbeth pressed her fingers to the man's chest, feeling the lingering cold. Not just the chill of death, but something deeper, a heaviness, as if the flesh itself resented being here. She frowned. "Hold still," she muttered out of habit, though the dead never listened. Her knife slid into skin with a wet sound. She worked carefully, precisely, the way Master Faust had taught her. No wasted motion, no unnecessary damage. The body was not sacred, but it was owed respect. That was what he said, anyway. Still, as she opened the ribcage, she found herself glancing toward the far wall. 3 hooks were empty. They should not have been. Lisbeth wiped her blade clean on a rag and walked over, boots crunching softly on the grit-strewn floor. She counted again, slower this time. 1, 2, 3. Empty iron hooks, gently swaying as if recently disturbed. Yesterday they had held bodies. She was certain of it. A twinge of unease tightened in her gut. She went to the ledger on the side desk, its leather cover cracked and darkened by years of greasy fingers. Flipping through the pages, she found the entries for the past week. Dockhand, beggar, 2 soldiers from a tavern brawl, a woman trampled during a market riot. All accounted for, all signed in, all signed out, burned, buried, or claimed, except they weren't. Lisbeth traced the ink with her finger, lips moving silently as she counted. "No," she whispered, "that's wrong." She knew the difference between an error and a lie. This was neither. The numbers added up on the page, but not in the room. Bodies did not simply vanish, not without someone noticing, not without a stink or a trail or a mess, unless someone wanted it that way. She heard footsteps then, measured and heavy, echoing down the corridor. Lisbeth snapped the ledger shut and returned to her slab just as Master Erwin Faust entered the morgue. He was a tall man, stooped more by habit than age, his black coat immaculate despite the filth of his profession. His hair, once blonde, had thinned to iron gray, pulled back tightly. His eyes were sharp and pale, always watching, always weighing. "You're early," he said, voice smooth as oiled leather. "Someone had to be," Lisbeth replied. "The river doesn't wait." A flicker of something, approval, perhaps, crossed his face. Then it was gone. Faust's gaze drifted, casual as a hawk's, to the empty hooks. Lisbeth watched him closely, too closely, perhaps. "You're missing bodies," she said. He did not react, not at first. Then he sighed, as though she had pointed out a cracked tile. "Clerical error," Faust said. "It happens." "No, it doesn't," Lisbeth said before she could stop herself. "Not like this." Faust's eyes sharpened. "Careful. I mean," she swallowed, "I checked the ledger. They're signed out, but no one came to claim them, and they weren't prepared for burial. Then they were moved," Faust said mildly, "or burned early, or buried without ceremony. It is not our concern." Lisbeth clenched her jaw. "It is if someone's stealing corpses." That got his attention. He stepped closer, looming over her, the smell of clove oil and old parchment clinging to him. "Mind your thoughts," he said softly. "Averheim is full of rumors. Dead men do not walk, graves do not empty themselves, and apprentices who imagine such things find themselves without masters." The words were calm. The threat beneath them was not. Lisbeth lowered her eyes. "Yes, master." Faust nodded once, satisfied, and turned away. "Finish your work, and do not speak of this again." When he was gone, the morgue felt colder. Lisbeth worked in silence after that, but her thoughts refused to settle. Every creak of timber sounded like a footstep, every drip of water like a breath. She finished the dockhand and wrapped him tight, binding the jaw shut, crossing the hands over the chest. As she did, she noticed something dark beneath his fingernails. Not river silt, dirt, fresh. Her heart began to pound. By the time she left the morgue, dusk had fallen, and Averheim had donned its other face. Lanterns flickered to life, casting long shadows across streets slick with grime. The air buzzed with murmured prayers and half-drunk laughter. Somewhere, bells tolled the hour, their sound swallowed quickly by the fog rolling in from the rake. Lisbeth pulled her cloak tight and took the long way home, past the garden of Morr. The walls there were high and thick, carved with skulls and ravens. Inside, rows of blackened mausoleums, hunched like penitents, their doors sealed with sigils meant to keep the dead sleeping. Morr's priests moved through the grounds with lanterns held close, their faces pale beneath their hoods. Too many of them. Lisbeth slowed as she passed, watching from the shadows. One priest argued in low tones with another, his hands shaking. She caught fragments of their words, disturbed, signs, unquiet, before they noticed her and fell silent. A raven croaked from atop the wall. Lisbeth hurried on. In the alleyways beyond, the whispers grew louder. Dockworkers muttered of shapes moving near the riverbanks. A beggar swore he'd seen a corpse drag itself into a sewer, jaw hanging loose, eyes burning like witchlight. A woman clutched a charm of Morr and spat whenever death was mentioned, as if that alone might ward it off. Lisbeth listened. She remembered the dirt under the dockhand's nails, the empty hooks, Master Faust's calm dismissal, rot beneath civilization's surface. When she reached her door, she paused, hand hovering over the latch. For a moment, she imagined she heard breathing from the dark behind her. She turned. Nothing. Still, she barred the door that night and slept with a knife beneath her pillow, dreaming of iron hooks swaying gently, patiently, in the dark. Chapter 2. Dread beneath the stones. The noble arrived just before dawn, when Averheim's streets were empty but for drunks, watch patrols, and things best not named. Lisbeth heard the cart before she saw it, the groan of warped wheels, the wet clop of a tired horse, the murmured curses of the men hauling it. She was already in the morgue, hands deep in lye water, scrubbing last night's blood from her skin. When the cart stopped outside, the sound seemed too loud, as though the dead themselves were listening. She dried her hands and went to the side door. 2 watchmen stood there, faces drawn tight, eyes flicking anywhere but the shrouded shape between them. The body lay on a fine oaken bier, draped in velvet trimmed with gold thread. Even wrapped, it reeked of perfume and decay, an expensive attempt to hide an ugly truth. "Lisbeth Kremer," one of the watchmen said, clearing his throat. "By order of the Graf's court, body is to be handled discreetly." She raised an eyebrow. "Discreetly is all we do." The man swallowed. "This one is special." They pushed the bier inside without another word and left quickly, as though afraid the corpse might sit up and follow them out. Lisbeth barred the door behind them and stood for a moment, listening to the silence settle again. Then she pulled back the velvet. The noble's face stared up at her, eyes sunken, lips drawn back from yellowed teeth in a rictus that was not quite a smile. He was young, barely 30, and richly dressed even in death. Rings still adorned his fingers. A heavy signet lay on his chest, worked with the heraldry of a minor house Lisbeth only vaguely recognized. "What did you do?" she murmured. She began the examination. The skin was cold, but not as cold as it should have been. When she pressed her fingers to the chest, she felt it again, that strange heaviness, like a pressure behind the flesh. The smell was wrong, too. Not just rot, but something acrid, metallic, like burnt herbs and old copper. Lisbeth swallowed her unease and reached for her knife. The cut parted skin easily, too easily. Beneath, the flesh was bruised, dark, veins standing out in ugly black tracery that crawled toward the heart. As she opened the chest cavity, a faint greenish sheen flickered along the ribs, gone almost as soon as she blinked. Her breath caught. That was not natural. Not disease. Not poison. Lisbeth stepped back, heart hammering, every half-remembered sermon and whispered warning screaming in her skull. She had seen the marks before, once, in an old cadaver hauled in from a battlefield far to the east. Master Faust had dismissed it as corruption of the blood, but she remembered the way his hands had trembled as he stitched the body closed. Necromancy. The word felt dangerous even thinking it. She leaned closer, examining the noble's chest, and found it etched faintly into the sternum, a sigil no larger than a coin. It looked burned into the bone, lines precise and cruel, a mockery of runes she'd glimpsed in forbidden margins of church texts. Lisbeth recoiled as though struck. "Someone's been playing with you," she whispered, "and you didn't stay put." A sound behind her made her spin, knife raised. Nothing, just the morgue, quiet and patient, iron hooks waiting along the wall. Yet she could have sworn she'd heard a breath, slow and deliberate, not her own. She forced herself to finish the examination, hands shaking despite her effort to steady them. When she was done, she wrapped the noble tightly and marked the ledger with a trembling hand. Before she could bar the door, she noticed the side window. It was open. Lisbeth frowned. She was certain she had latched it the night before. She crossed the room cautiously and peered out. Across the narrow service yard, half hidden by shadow and fog, stood a figure, tall, cloaked, motionless. She could not see a face beneath the hood, only darkness where eyes should have been. The figure did not move, did not speak. It simply watched. Lisbeth's pulse roared in her ears. "Who are you?" she called, The figure turned and was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just empty cobbles and drifting mist. She slammed the window shut and backed away, knife clenched tight, heart threatening to tear free of her ribs. After a long moment, she forced herself to breathe again. By the time Master Faust arrived, Lisbeth was scrubbing the slab furiously, as though she could scour away the memory of the sigil, the watching presence, the sense that something ancient and hungry had brushed against her life. Faust took in the scene with a single glance. "Noble," he said. "Unfortunate." "There was a mark," Lisbeth said. She could not stop herself. "On the bone." Faust paused, just barely. "Marks appear for many reasons." This one glowed. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Faust set his gloves aside with deliberate care. "You are tired," he said at last. "Fatigued minds see things. I know what I saw." "No," he said sharply. "You think you do? There is a difference." Lisbeth clenched her fists. "Bodies are going missing. Now this." And someone was watching the morgue. Faust's gaze hardened. "Enough." He stepped closer, his presence pressing down on her. "You are an apprentice. Your duty is flesh and bone, not speculation. You will finish your work, you will keep your head down, and you will let men who understand these matters handle them." "And if they don't?" Lisbeth shot back. "If they're lying?" Faust's lips thinned. "Then they will answer to Morr, not you." He turned away, ending the conversation. "Clean your tools. We have another delivery tonight." Lisbeth stood there long after he left, anger and fear twisting together in her gut. She did not go home that evening. Instead, as the bells tolled twilight, she made her way back to the garden of Morr. The gates stood open, but the air inside felt wrong, too still, too heavy. Black-robed priests moved among the tombs with hurried steps, clutching lanterns and prayer books. Several graves lay freshly disturbed, soil piled carelessly to one side. Lisbeth approached one of the priests she recognized, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a perpetually worried expression. "Brother," she said quietly, "what's happening?" He flinched, then composed himself. "All is under control." "That's a lie." He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The dead are restless. Graves opened from within. Seals broken. We have doubled the watches, but more preserve us. Something is stirring beneath the city." Lisbeth thought of the noble's glowing sigil, of the watching figure, of empty hooks. "Have you told the Graf?" she asked. The priest gave a hollow laugh. "We have told everyone. No one listens until the dead start knocking." A scream echoed suddenly from deeper within the garden, a sharp, terrified sound that cut off abruptly. Priests ran, lanterns bobbing wildly. Lisbeth froze, every instinct screaming at her to flee. Instead, she edged forward, peering between mausoleums. She did not see what caused the scream. She only saw blood on the stones. When she finally left the garden, night had fully fallen. The fog pressed close, and every shadow seemed to stretch toward her. She hurried back toward the morgue, unease coiling tighter with every step. As she turned a corner, she glimpsed movement ahead, something pale slipping into an alley, dragging one foot behind it. "Lisbeth, stop!" The thing paused, as if sensing her gaze, then vanished into darkness. She did not follow. When she reached the morgue, she found Master Faust waiting, lantern in hand. "You look pale," he said. "I warned you about wandering." "There's something wrong," Lisbeth said. "You know it." Faust studied her for a long moment. In the lantern light, his eyes looked almost black. "Focus on your embalming," he said quietly. "That is how you survive what is coming." The door closed behind them with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. Chapter 3. Flesh and Fog. The fog came first. It slid in from the river like a living thing, thick and cloying, pressing against Averheim's walls and seeping through cracks in stone and timber. By the time the night bell tolled, the streets had vanished beneath it, and the city felt hollowed out, reduced to echoes, muffled footsteps, and the distant clang of watchmen's halberds striking cobbles they could barely see. Lisbeth Kramer was alone in the morgue when it began. Night shift was punishment duty, given to apprentices and men no one trusted. Master Faust had left hours earlier, lantern swinging gently at his side, leaving Lisbeth with 3 new bodies and strict instructions not to leave until dawn. The doors were barred, the windows shuttered. The only light came from oil lamps that hissed and guttered, casting long, warped shadows across the stone walls. She tried to focus on her work. The corpse on the slab was a vagrant woman, ribs sharp beneath parchment skin, hair matted with filth. Exposure likely. Lisbeth washed the body with practiced efficiency, murmuring the rote phrases she had learned as a child, half prayer, half habit. "Morr, watch over you. Morr, keep you still." The words tasted bitter tonight. Somewhere in the building, iron creaked. Lisbeth froze, cloth in hand. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate groan, like metal dragged across stone. She swallowed and forced herself to move, finishing the washing and drawing the sheet over the woman's face. Her breath fogged faintly in the cold air, though the lamps still burned. That was wrong. She turned toward the hook wall. One of the bodies hanging there twitched. At first, she told herself it was her imagination. The fog did that, played tricks, made shadows pulse and shift. But then the corpse jerked again, more violently this time, chains rattling as its head lolled to one side. Lisbeth stepped back, heart hammering. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The corpse convulsed. Its chest heaved, ribs cracking audibly beneath desiccated flesh. A wet, choking sound tore from its throat, halfway between a scream and a sob. Green light flared behind its closed eyelids, spilling out in thin, sickly lines. The body screamed. It was not the sound of breath drawn into lungs. It was the sound of something dragged back into flesh that did not want it. Lisbeth stumbled, catching herself on the slab as the corpse tore free of its hooks. Iron bent with a shriek. The body hit the floor hard, limbs spasming, fingers clawing at stone slick with old blood. "Stay down!" Lisbeth shouted, voice cracking. The corpse did not listen. It lurched upright, joints popping and tearing, mouth gaping wide as green fire poured from between its teeth. Its skin split along old sutures, and something dark pulsed beneath, like veins filled with liquid night. It rushed her. Lisbeth grabbed the nearest thing her bone saw and swung wildly. The blade bit into the corpse's shoulder, shearing through brittle bone. The arm came away in a spray of blackened ichor, but the thing did not slow. It slammed into her, sending them both crashing into a table. Pain exploded through her ribs. She screamed as its fingers closed around her throat, skin burning cold where it touched. The green light flared brighter, and she smelled copper and rot and something older, deeper. "No!" she gasped, kicking blindly. Her heels struck something solid. The lamp toppled, shattering as it hit the floor. Fire bloomed, oil spreading in a sudden inferno. The corpse shrieked as flames licked its legs, but still it clawed at her, jaw snapping inches from her face. Lisbeth fumbled for her knife, fingers slick with sweat and blood. She drove it up under the corpse's chin, straight into the skull. The blade struck bone and stopped. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the green light surged, blasting out through the corpse's eyes and mouth in a blinding flare. The body convulsed violently, then went limp, collapsing atop her in a smoking heap. Lisbeth shoved it off and crawled away, retching, lungs burning. The flames died quickly, leaving the morgue stinking of smoke and charred flesh. Her hands shook so badly she had to press them flat against the floor to steady herself. The corpse did not move again. After a long, shuddering minute, Lisbeth forced herself to stand. Every part of her screamed to flee, to run screaming into the fog and never look back. But another part, harder, colder, pushed her forward. She had to know. She rolled the corpse onto its back and cut open the chest. Inside, where the heart should have been, was a cavity scorched black. Etched into the bone beneath was a sigil larger than before, jagged and cruel, its lines filled with a substance that drank the light around it. Lisbeth stared at it, terror giving way to grim certainty. This was no accident. She cleaned herself as best she could, changed her blood-soaked apron, and barred the doors again. Dawn was still hours away, but she did not sleep. Instead, she packed a satchel with what she needed and slipped out into the fog once the bells marked the 3rd hour. The Collegium Theologica loomed over its quarter like a crouching beast, its towers disappearing into the mist. Lisbeth knew the back ways, the forgotten doors, the loose stones. Apprentices learn such things quickly, or not at all. She moved through the silent halls with a lantern shuttered tight, guided by memory and desperation. The restricted archives lay beneath the main chapel, sealed and warded more by threat than by spell. Few dared enter, fewer still returned unscathed. Lisbeth took 3 books. She did not know their titles, only that their spines were blackened, their pages edged in red ink. She wrapped them in cloth and fled before the fog could swallow her courage entirely. She read until her eyes burned. By candlelight in her cramped room, she devoured forbidden words and diagrams that spoke of death not as an end, but as a tool, of pyramids, of black stone raised in distant deserts, of cabals and keys and sigils burned into bone to anchor restless souls. One symbol appeared again and again, the one she had seen tonight. A knock came at her door. Lisbeth nearly screamed. "Quiet," a voice hissed from the other side. "Male, low, urgent. If you value your life, open the door," knife in hand. She unbarred it a crack. A hooded man slipped inside, cloak dripping fog onto the floor. His face was pale and drawn, eyes fever-bright. He smelled of incense and sweat and old blood. "You saw it rise," he said. "It was not a question." Lisbeth nodded, heart racing. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "Then listen carefully. Your master is not what he seems." Her blood ran cold. "He serves the Black Pyramid." Before she could respond, he was gone, swallowed by the fog and the night, leaving Lisbeth alone with forbidden knowledge and the certainty that Averheim's dead would not rest quietly much longer. Chapter 4. Cults and Coffins. The fog had not lifted for 3 days. It strangled the streets of Averheim like a noose of damp wool, coiling tighter with each breathless hour. Horses refused to move. Dogs howled at doors they refused to cross. The rake festered beneath the shroud like a wound no balm could reach. The city had turned inward, windows shuttered, bells muffled, mouths closed around whispers. Lisbeth moved like a shadow through it all. She no longer trusted the morgue, not with Erwin Faust still watching her from across the slab, eyes too knowing, voice too smooth, not with the chain-wrapped bodies occasionally jerking in their bindings, jaws gnashing though their eyes were sewn shut. The black sigil from the corpse 2 nights past still burned in her thoughts, etched now into her dreams. She saw it behind her eyelids, pulsating like a wound. She smelled burned herbs and tasted iron. She heard the screams again. Always the screams. The books she'd stolen had grown heavier in her satchel, as if aware of their own blasphemy. She read them in secret, each page whispering madness in ancient tongues. She learned of the Nachtseal, the night soul that could be bound to flesh, of bone branding, of black pyres, of pyramids that cast no shadow because the darkness came from within, and of die Schwarze Blut. They were not named often, only obliquely, always in dread, the black blood cabal, necromancers, grave breakers, flesh callers, and, if her suspicions were correct, Master Erwin Faust had once worn their mark. It was past midnight when the knock came, a slow, deliberate rapping at her room's door. 3 beats, pause, 2 more, not the rhythm of Faust's cane, not the panicked hammering of a frightened townsman. This was ritual. Lisbeth opened the door with her knife in hand. A man stood there, cloaked in the garb of Morr's lesser priests, black robes, silver-threaded cuffs, a skull-shaped censer clutched in one gloved hand. His face was like granite, carved by grief, sharp, gaunt, eyes like dying embers. "I am Father Volker," he said, without introduction or preamble. "You have been asking questions that scrape bone. We should talk." She led him in, warily. He paced her narrow chamber like a caged wolf, examining the stolen tomes with a sneer. "These words are not for your eyes. They corrupt the soul. They saved my life. Perhaps," he allowed, "but only so it may be taken more painfully later." She met his gaze. "What do you know of die Schwarze Blut?" Volker's eyes narrowed. "More than is safe, and more than you should be asking." Lisbeth stepped closer, defiantly. "Corpses are going missing, graves disturbed. I've seen them rise, with brands in their bones. Something's happening under our feet, and everyone's pretending it isn't." Volker sighed through his nose. "Because if Averheim knew the truth, the streets would run red before midnight. The cult of Morr has fought these bastards since before Sigmar walked, but they are shadows, and shadows cannot be killed by steel." He reached into his robes and withdrew a small bundle of vellum, bound in black twine. "Take this," he said. "Read only when alone. Do not let your master see it." Lisbeth took the bundle with trembling hands. "You think he's involved." "I know he is," Volker replied. "He was exiled from Nuln 30 years ago. The records were buried. Officially, it was a dispute of doctrine, but necromancy hides beneath many cloaks. He has ties to the Schwarze Blut. He taught me how to close a corpse's eyes," Lisbeth whispered. "He said even the dead deserve dignity." Volker's mouth twisted. "Some men wrap poison in poetry." The air shifted, heavy, like thunder about to break. Volker turned to leave. "If he suspects you, he'll give you a choice, obedience or silence. Neither ends well." Then he was gone, swallowed by the fog. Lisbeth read the vellum under candlelight, hands shaking. It contained names, dozens. City officials, scholars, morticians, watch officers, all marked with symbols, some denoting suspicion, others absolute confirmation. At the bottom, in red ink, 2 names underlined together, Erwin Faust, Sebald Hornrauch. The second name was unfamiliar. The rest chilled her to the marrow. Half the city's death infrastructure had been compromised. That night, Lisbeth could not sleep. She dreamed of bones whispering secrets to her, of corpses singing hymns with mouths full of soil. She woke with blood on her sheets, nosebleed probably, though part of her feared it had come from elsewhere. The next evening, Master Faust summoned her. She entered his study with cautious steps. The room was, as it always had been, orderly, clean, lined with tomes and scrolls. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting orange light on his pale, sharp face. He did not look up from his writing. "I've heard interesting things," he said. Lisbeth said nothing. "That you've been speaking with priests, reading things above your station, asking about things best left buried." Still she stayed silent. Finally, he set down his quill. "You disappoint me, Lisbeth. I want to know the truth," she said, "about the dead, about you." His smile was sad. "Then let me offer you a truth." He stood, hands behind his back. "The cult of Morr believes they protect the soul," he said, "but they do not. They hide it. They bury it in superstition and fear. But the soul is not a candle to be snuffed. It is a flame to be harnessed. Death is not an ending. It is power. The Schwarze Blut understand this. So you admit it. I admit nothing," he said. "But I offer you a choice." He stepped closer. "Stop asking questions. Burn the vellum. Return to your slab. Learn from me. In time you will understand. Or," he raised a single gloved finger, "you may continue down this path of suspicion and secrets, and I will treat you accordingly." "You'd kill me?" He laughed softly. "Oh, Lisbeth, killing you would be a waste. You're too gifted for that." She felt something move in the air then, a pressure, faint but real. The same presence she'd felt when the corpse had screamed, when the sigil had glowed. Faust's eyes were lit from within. "Decide soon," he said. "I would hate for your last breath to be wasted on regret." She turned and left. Only when she was 2 streets away did she allow herself to breathe again. That night, Lisbeth buried the vellum beneath a headstone in the garden of Morr. The dead, at least, could be trusted to keep secrets. She lit no candles, spoke no prayers, just pressed her hand to the cold stone and whispered, "Watch over me." Then she vanished into the fog once more, knowing the war for Averheim's soul had already begun, and that she had just chosen a side. Chapter 5. Tombs of the Forgotten. The entrance to the old crypts was beneath a butcher's shop. Lisbeth had followed Father Volker through half the city to reach it, slipping between the fog-choked alleys and shadow-laced market lanes, until the world narrowed to a blood-slick cobblestone floor and the scent of dead pigs. The shop was abandoned now, blessedly so. The meat hooks still hung like iron fangs from the rafters, swaying slightly in the absence of wind. Volker produced a rusted key from his robe and unlocked a trapdoor hidden beneath a stained butcher's block. It groaned open on swollen hinges, revealing a stairwell choked in darkness and rot. "They buried the entrances after the Black Plague," Volker said, voice like cracked parchment, "but not deep enough." Lisbeth pulled a lantern from her satchel and lit it with shaking hands. The flame hissed in the stagnant air. Then they descended. The walls of the tunnel pressed close, slick with mildew, carved from stone older than Averheim's founding. Each step down was an act of rebellion against sanity, against the voice screaming in her skull that this place should not be opened. Ancient sigils had been chiseled into the steps, worn smooth by centuries of forgotten feet. Volker walked ahead, censer swinging gently in his hand, its smoke clinging to the walls like a ward against whatever slept below. Lisbeth had stopped believing in such protections. After several minutes of descent, the stairs leveled out into a corridor lined with tombs, great stone sarcophagi sealed with chains and iron nails, lids carved with faces contorted in agony or reverence. Names had long since faded. Only the dead remembered who lay within. "Do you know what this place was?" Volker asked. She shook her head. "An ossuary for heretics, magi, murderers, blasphemers, the sort of souls Morr wanted hidden from the world. But bones don't forget, and death doesn't forgive." He knelt beside a sealed tomb and brushed away dust to reveal a crudely carved sigil, jagged, looping, unmistakable. Lisbeth's stomach turned. The black sigil. They were here long before Averheim rose from the river mud, Volker said. The schwarze Blut root deep. They pressed on. Soon, the corridor gave way to a vast vault, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of stone slabs filled the chamber, and atop each rested a body, some old, some disturbingly fresh. Most were mangled, twisted in ways that defied nature. Lisbeth moved closer to one and recoiled. The corpse had been flayed from the waist down, its skin stretched and nailed into the stone beneath. Runes were carved into its exposed muscles, seeping ichor as if fresh. Its eyes were stitched shut, but its lips had been left open, pulled into a silent scream. "This isn't burial," she hissed. "This is dissection. Ritual. Worse," Volker said grimly. "Refinement." He pointed to another body, this one with 4 arms, 2 of which had been fused into its chest, veins pulsing with a sluggish green fluid. Bones jutted from its back like wings. Its skull had been opened and then resealed with black metal. "They're building vessels," he said. "Testing forms, trying to find what can hold a soul without shattering." Lisbeth forced bile back down her throat. "For what?" Volker's face darkened. "Not what. Who?" He led her to the far side of the vault, where a massive stone relief had been carved into the wall, a figure seated on a black throne, its face hidden beneath a crown of finger bones. Dozens of figures knelt before it, hands raised in supplication, their mouths stitched shut. Beneath it, ancient high Gothic script read, "He who waits in bone." Lisbeth touched the edge of the relief and recoiled. The stone was cold. Too cold. Volker spoke as if reciting a curse. "Long before Sigmar, there lived a necromancer lord forgotten by the world, but not by the dead. His name is not spoken, but his faithful called him Varnach, the Eternal. When he was slain, his soul did not pass on. It was bound, hidden, trapped in a relic known only as the Lich Key." She stepped back. "That's what the Schwarze Blut want," Volker nodded. "The key was lost centuries ago, but they believe they can reconstruct it, piece by piece, using death itself as the mortar." A sound interrupted him. Soft, wet, wrong. Lisbeth turned toward the nearest slab and froze. One of the corpses was moving. Its chest rose and fell in a grotesque rhythm. A gurgle escaped its lips. The runes on its flesh glowed faint green. Its hand twitched, then curled into a fist. Volker dropped his censer and drew a blade. "We've been discovered." From the shadows, figures emerged. cloaked in tattered robes, faces hidden behind veils of bone and ash. The cultists of Die Schwarzeblut advanced with slow, deliberate steps. Their eyes burned with unnatural light. In their hands, they held daggers of obsidian and rusted bone saws. "Back," Volker barked. "To the corridor." But they were surrounded. Lisbeth slashed at the nearest cultist with her lantern, shattering the glass and spraying flame across the figure's robes. It screamed, a shrill, inhuman sound, but did not fall. Volker fought like a man possessed, blade flickering with silvery fire. Each strike he made severed flesh and unmade it, dissolving the corrupted tissue as though he wielded a fragment of divine wrath. But there were too many. Lisbeth grabbed a ceremonial censer from the floor and smashed it into a cultist's skull, bones crunching beneath the iron. Another seized her from behind, dragging her toward a slab, fingers clawing at her throat. Then a flash of light, Volker's blade, and the grip slackened, but blood sprayed across the floor, dark and arterial. Volker staggered. A dagger protruded from beneath his ribs, pulsing with green energy. "No!" Lisbeth screamed. He fell to one knee, blade dragging against stone. "Run!" he rasped. "The Lich Key cannot be allowed to return. Run!" Lisbeth hesitated, then turned and fled. She sprinted through the vault, past the slabs, past the screaming corpses awakening to half-life. The walls howled, the stones trembled. She could feel something ancient rising in the deep, its hunger awakening after centuries of silence. She reached the stairwell and did not look back. She emerged into moonlight, like a corpse clawing from the grave, soaked in blood and smoke, lungs heaving. The butcher's shop was burning. Lisbeth stumbled through the side alley as flames consumed the building, lighting the fog with a hellish glow. Somewhere beneath her feet, screams echoed up from the crypts, then were silenced. She didn't stop running until the bells of the Garden of Morr rang dawn. Volker was gone. The cabal had the tomb, and the Lich Key was no longer myth. It was prophecy, one already being fulfilled. Chapter 6. Master of the Veil. Lisbeth returned to the morgue 3 nights after the butcher's shop burned. She moved like a ghost, cloak drawn tight, eyes raw from weeping and smoke, blood dried in the creases of her skin. The streets were quieter now, people whispering about missing kin, the stench of fire, and something that slithered behind the veil of fog. Averheim was a corpse itself, bloated and twitching. Inside, the morgue felt colder than it ever had. The hooks were empty, the slabs scrubbed clean. No apprentices milled about, no watchman delivered bodies. The air smelled only faintly of formaldehyde, as though death itself were taking careful, measured breaths. Erwin Faust was waiting for her in the embalming room. He stood, with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, his long coat as immaculate as ever. A thin trail of incense curled from the brass holder at his side, but it wasn't the sweet scent of Morr's rites. It was bitter, pungent, acrid. It stung Lisbeth's eyes and made her stomach twist. "I wondered if you would return," he said, without turning. Lisbeth remained by the doorway. "Volker is dead. I suspected as much. Zealotry makes for poor tactics." His voice was calm, unhurried, as though they were discussing the weather. "You sent him to die." "No," he said softly. "He chose death, as all zealots do. But you survived. You see now that the cult cannot stop what's coming, nor can the Schwarzeblut." He turned to face her. Gone was the tired mortician she had once thought of as her master. The man before her stood straighter now, taller, as though the weight of pretense had finally fallen from his shoulders. His eyes glowed faintly beneath the lantern light, no longer the pale blue of Averland's nobility, but a ghostly grey shot through with filaments of green. "You're one of them," she whispered. "No," he said firmly. "I was one of them. I studied under Hornrauk. I learned their arts, their goals, their madness. But they wished to serve death. I wished to master it." He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and she flinched without meaning to. "I raised my first corpse when I was 16, he continued. "A mistake, a sin. I thought I could bring back my sister, bless her soul. I failed, of course, but I learned something important. The dead are malleable. They are clay, Lisbeth, and the clay remembers what it was." She shook her head. "You're talking madness. I'm offering truth," he said, voice rising. "You've seen it now. The Cabal seeks to raise Varnach. If they find the last piece of the Lich Key, they will awaken a lord of undeath who once bathed empires in blood. And the cult? They'll drown this city in pyres before they let the truth surface." "So what?" Lisbeth demanded. "You think you can stop them?" "I know I can," Faust said, eyes burning. "But not alone." He drew something from his coat, a small wooden case, velvet-lined. Within it sat a sliver of bone, blackened and etched with sigils too small for her to read. "This is a binding shard," he said. "Part of the key. I stole it years ago. They've been looking for it ever since. Why show me? Because you are standing at a crossroad. Serve the cult, die screaming. Join the Cabal, die hollow. Or stand with me." Lisbeth narrowed her eyes. "What's in it for me?" Faust smiled. "Knowledge, power, survival, and vengeance." He stepped closer and held out the shard. "Touch it." She hesitated. Then she reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the sliver of bone, the world changed. A scream tore through her skull, not her own, but something ancient, echoing from beyond the veil. Images flooded her mind. Bone towers under blackened skies, rivers of blood flowing uphill, a throne of marrow and iron. She felt the breath of the dead, cold and longing, as though the shard remembered every soul it had ever touched. Then it was gone. She gasped and staggered back. Faust caught her arm. "Do you see now? This is the war. It's not just about corpses or cults. It's about the soul. Who owns it? Who controls it?" Lisbeth looked into his eyes and saw no lies there, only fire. "What do I have to do?" she asked. His lessons began that night. They practiced in the embalming chamber, where the walls were thick with soot and the floor forever damp with blood. He began by teaching her binding sigils, how to carve them into flesh, how to lace them with whispers. He showed her how to touch a soul, how to brush its edges without tearing it apart. It felt like playing with a loaded musket while blindfolded. She failed often. The first corpse she tried to animate clawed at its own face and shrieked until Faust decapitated it with a silver knife. The second sat up, smiled at her with its split lips, and uttered her mother's name in a voice like grinding teeth. That one they burned, but by the fifth night, she managed it. The corpse of a pauper twitched beneath her hands, eyes fluttering. It turned its head, looked at her, mouthed, "Thank you." She nearly wept. "You gave it peace," Faust said, even briefly. "That is more than the cult offers. They worked in secret." Lisbeth wore black gloves now, laced with copper thread to channel the energies more easily. Her fingertips were always cold. She bled from her nose more nights than not. She dreamed of death, of speaking with it like an old friend across a candle-lit table. It never answered, but it always watched. Faust taught her to craft wards, neck symbols, to anchor the spirit, to banish intrusions, to trap rogue entities. They etched them into the floorboards, into the slabs, even into the bone dust they kept in glass vials. And always, beneath it all, the presence of the Lich Key lingered. It called to her now in dreams, beckoning with fingers of fire and bone. She did not tell Faust. A week later, as the fog deepened and the bells fell silent, Faust brought her to the catacombs beneath the chapel of Ulrich. It had long been abandoned, sealed after the plague, left to collapse in on itself. They pried the iron gate open with tools and stepped into darkness thick enough to drink. "This is where Hornrauch hides," Faust whispered. "We're not ready yet, but we will be." Lisbeth nodded. For the first time, she did not feel like an apprentice. She felt like a weapon being forged. And soon, someone would bleed. Chapter 7. Blood Moon Rising. The moon rose like a wound. It bled across the sky in a color no sane man could name, redder than rust, thicker than wine, sicklier than any sunset. It hung above the ruins of Reichschaffen like a watching eye, and the land beneath it groaned. Lisbeth stood at the edge of the broken city, breath fogging in the cold air, hands wrapped around the hilt of a dagger etched with runes too old for Reichspiel. Her gloves were gone. Her fingers were raw and cracked, crusted with ash and sigil ink. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Beside her stood Erwin Faust, cloaked in silence and spell-threaded cloth, his face gaunt and too still. Around them, the remnants of the cult of Morr, 6 in total, clutched their weapons and charms with white-knuckled fists. Gone were the black-robed priests with censer smoke and funeral rites. These were zealots and madmen, the last line between the living and whatever clawed its way from the earth tonight. The ruins stretched before them like the remains of a rotted giant, stone ribs, collapsed towers, streets swallowed by creeping roots, and time. Reichschaffen had been dead for 100 years, reduced to dust by plague and fire, but death had never truly left. Tonight, it danced. The wind carried, chanting deep, rhythmic, older than the empire itself. Lisbeth felt it in her bones, a vibration that didn't pass through the ears but through the marrow. The syllables weren't words, they were commands, summons. The very air trembled. "They've begun," Erwin said, voice soft as a knife unsheathing. Lisbeth swallowed the bile rising in her throat. "Then we stop them." Faust turned to her, eyes faintly glowing beneath his hood. "We will not all leave this place." She nodded. "I know." Then they moved. The Cabal had taken the old cathedral. Its spire lay broken across the nave, half buried in rubble, but the substructures beneath remained intact vaults where blood rites had once honored gods long since forgotten. They had repurposed it, festooned the shattered arches with bone lanterns and sinew banners. Dozens of cultists stood within, robes soaked in viscera, faces hidden beneath masks of stitched flesh. At the center of the desecrated altar, the ritual churned. The Lich Key assembled, glowing, throbbing with stolen souls, floated above a yawning pit ringed with glyphs. Bones swirled in the air around it like leaves in a storm, forming the shape of a figure tall as a giant, crowned in smoke and darkness. Varnach, the Eternal, still forming, still dreaming. Erwin raised a hand. Symbols flared around them in silence, wards of concealment. He turned to the cult's remnants and spoke without fear. "When they break, they will break fast. Strike at the casters, sever their voices. Without the chant, the ritual fails." He looked to Lisbeth last. "And if you use the key." Lisbeth nodded, clutching the relic beneath her cloak. It burned even through the fabric, pulsing against her chest like a second heart. Then the spell dropped, and all hell opened. The cult of Morr's warriors charged, screaming death prayers, blades flashing. Irvin raised both hands and tore the ground open with a word. Flames of green and violet erupted from the stones, devouring half a dozen cultists before they could react. Lisbeth sprinted toward the altar, ducking under a sweep of bone scythes from a reanimated monstrosity stitched from at least 3 corpses. Her dagger flashed, severing its jaw before it could scream, then plunged into its eye. It collapsed in a convulsion of light. The chanting wavered. One of the priests hurled a blessed relic, a skull filled with holy ash, into the crowd. It detonated with a flash of gold, incinerating a ring of cultists. Another lost his arm to a shrieking ghoul before he could cast again. Lisbeth saw Erwin at the center of the chaos, moving like a conductor amidst a symphony of screams. His hands danced with ghostlight. Every word he spoke, unmade flesh, unraveling bone, freezing blood mid-pulse. Then the cabal's leader stepped forward. Sebald Hornrauch. His body was little more than a skeleton wrapped in dried skin, but his presence was colossal, cloaked in black mist, crowned in horns made from fused vertebrae. His mouth glowed green from within as he intoned the final phrases of the ritual. The Lich Key hovered before him now, the soul of Varnach nearly complete. "He wakes!" Hornrauch roared. "Not yet," Erwin snarled. He hurled a sphere of necrotic fire toward Hornrauch. It struck a barrier mid-air and exploded, sending Lisbeth flying. She hit the ground hard, ribs cracking. When she staggered to her feet, she saw Erwin cross the altar steps. His robes were aflame. Blood soaked his side, but he raised a hand, and the Lich Key quivered. Hornrauch turned, mouth open in shock. "You would betray us again?" he bellowed. "I never stopped," Erwin whispered, and then he plunged his hand into the altar and uttered a word Lisbeth had never heard. The world screamed. Hornrauch and Erwin were consumed in an eruption of white fire so bright it cast shadows backward. The altar shattered. Cultists fell, writhing. The ritual faltered, but it did not die. From the smoking pit, the incomplete form of Varnach rose, a horror of bone and vapor, 10 feet tall, held together by hatred and sorcery. Its eyes glowed like coals, its mouth open not to speak, but to breathe, and that breath was cold enough to freeze air itself. It saw Lisbeth, and it knew her. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The Lich Key pulsed against her chest. Her hand moved on instinct, drawing it free. The relic screamed a keening wail of all the souls trapped within. The bone fragments spun in her hand, lines of power etching into the air around it. Varnach stepped forward. She spoke a word, the only word Erwin had never taught her, but which the key gave her. The world stopped. The dead froze. Time fractured, and in that space, Lisbeth commanded. The key flew from her hand and embedded itself into Varnach's chest. He reared back, howling. The spell of binding reversed. The stolen souls tore free in shrieking streams of color. The bones disassembled mid-air, scattering like ash in the wind. Then, silence. Varnach was gone. Lisbeth collapsed to her knees. The key reduced to dust. Around her, the ruins were littered with corpses, cultists, priests, horrors never meant to live. The blood moon faded. Dawn crept over the mountains, and Lisbeth Kramer, mortician's apprentice, sat in the ashes of a god. Chapter 8. keeper of ashes. Averheim did not celebrate. No horns blew in triumph. No bard sang victory ballads in the square. There were no parades, no garlands, no painted faces of cheering children. The city simply breathed shallow and pained, like a man waking from a fever dream with the taste of copper still clinging to his tongue. Smoke still curled from the chimneys of burned-out tenements. The rake, once silver, now ran sluggish and grey, bloated with runoff from the ruined dead fields east of the walls. Black ash lay thick in the gutters. In the air, a strange silence hung like a second fog, heavy, expectant, haunted, and deep beneath it all, the cobbles remembered blood. They would, for a long time. Lisbeth Cramer walked alone through the hushed streets. Her boots left faint prints in the soot. The wounds across her ribs were bound tight beneath her coat, but every step burned. She hadn't slept since the night the lich key turned to dust in her hand. Couldn't. When she closed her eyes, she still heard it screaming. Above her, crows wheeled in erratic spirals. Too many crows, not enough dead left to bury. The temple of Morr loomed ahead, its bells silent for the first time in days. Father Folker was gone. His body had been recovered from beneath the shattered cathedral, his hand still clutching the iron blade he had used to sever the spine of a summoned horror twice his size. They buried him in silence, as he would have preferred. Beneath a cracked gravestone, without a name, the surviving priests met Lisbeth in the shadowed nave. There were 3 now, just 3, haggard, grey-eyed, robes torn and mended too many times. They watched her with a reverence that unsettled more than flattered. She had not come for blessing or comfort. She had come to say no. You have done what no priest, no scholar, no hunter of the dead has done, said the eldest, a woman whose name she had not learned. You have broken a prophecy, scattered a soul long thought immortal. You have burned the future. Lisbeth said nothing. The priestess inclined her head. We would name you our keeper of bones, our saint of ashes. We would offer you robes and relics, teachings, protection. Lisbeth looked around at the blackened pews, the soot-stained icons. And when the next one rises? When the next cult forms in the sewers, or beneath the stones, or in some forgotten crypt, what then? Do you bury the bones again? Pretend they'll stay still? The priestess hesitated. I don't want a title, Lisbeth said. I want a city that doesn't rot from beneath, and I can't get that chanting from a pulpit. She left them without waiting for a response. The morgue was still standing, barely. The roof sagged where fire had licked it. The main gate hung off its hinges. The cold rooms had been ransacked, the tools scattered, some warped beyond use by ambient magic. Blood and embalming fluid had mixed into a foul black crust on the floor. It was home. Lisbeth stepped inside, boots crunching over shattered glass and bone fragments. Dust clung to the air. A single oil lamp still sat on the central slab, somehow untouched. She lit it. The flame guttered, then caught. Warm, familiar, in the faint light. She saw them. The hooks, still swaying slightly, as if waiting, as if remembering. She picked up one of Erwin Faust's journals from the floor. The binding was scorched, the ink smeared. She turned the pages slowly, carefully. His hand had changed in the later entries, more urgent, more angular, as if he knew time was closing in. He had left no final message for her, no grand farewell, just diagrams of soul lattices, rituals scribbled in shorthand, and warnings in half-written, high Gothic. Do not call what you cannot cage. That, at least, she understood now. Lisbeth cleaned the slab first, scrubbed it down until the stone gleamed. Then she sorted the instruments, one by one, the scalpel, the bone saw, the hooks and clamps. She checked each for rust, tested each in her hand, laid them back into the drawer with reverence. The embalming chamber became hers not by declaration, but by blood and fire, by right. That night, the first body arrived, a city watchman, throat slit by a panicked street prophet who swore he saw the moon's red twin rising from the sewers. The watch captain wheeled the corpse in on a blood-stained cart, said nothing, and left without a receipt. Lisbeth nodded to no one and went to work. She opened the man's chest with steady hands, cleaned the cavity, sewed him shut with black thread and burnt herbs, whispered not a prayer, but a warning. Morr watches, but so do I. The nights grew quieter. Whispers still haunted the alleys. Of course, a child born with eyes that glowed faint green, a dog that refused to cross the old stone bridge, a street lamp that flickered only when someone walked beneath it alone. Lisbeth, listener, she wandered the graveyards after midnight, lanterns swinging, sigils tucked into her gloves. She sketched new bindings into alley walls where blood had once pooled. She left wards carved beneath taverns, behind bakeries, in the cracks of merchant doors. The dead had no right to peace if they refused to stay buried. Sometimes she felt them watching, the old ones, the hungry ones, the things that had whispered to Erwin and Hornrauch and Varnach himself. They waited beyond the veil, clawing at the seams. But now they had a gatekeeper, not a saint, not a hero, a mortician, Lisbeth Krämer, keeper of ashes, slayer of gods, the girl who learned to sew the world shut.